Have you ever heard the story of Evilism? It's a city of unimaginable happiness, of breathtaking beauty and profound peace. Its citizens are intelligent, sophisticated, and compassionate. There is no crime, no suffering, and no inequality. It is, by all measures, a perfect society. But the city's perfection comes at a terrible price. In a locked room, beneath one of those beautiful buildings, a single child lives in perpetual misery. It lives in darkness, filth, and fear. And every citizen of Evilism, once they are old enough to understand, is brought to see the child. They are told that their entire society, all of their happiness, their health, and their beauty, depends entirely on this one child's abominable suffering. Most accept the cost. That child in the basement, that is the global south. We are the citizens of Evilism. Before we can diagnose the sickness of the modern Western left, we must first establish what the left stands for. The historian Roberto Bobbio observes that the terms originate in the French National Assembly, where revolutionaries seeking to abolish the monarchy sat on the left, while its defenders sat on the right. At its most fundamental level then, the left is defined by its opposition to an existing exploitative order. Many today in the West distill this down to a single ideal of equality, stating that the left is defined by its egalitarianism, while the right accepts or promotes inequality. But this common definition, while it's a useful starting point, is dangerously incomplete. It raises a critical question: equality of what? After all, what is the value of equality if people of different sexes, ethnicities, and backgrounds are all equally oppressed under an exploitative system? A more precise definition, then, shifts the focus from equality to its necessary precondition of reducing exploitation. And to understand exploitation in our time, we must first identify the dominant global system. It is an order of neoliberal capitalism and imperialism, a system brutally enforced to secure markets and resources for a few powerful nations. For the global south, the system is a cage, a mechanism of perpetual extraction designed to ensure, as the anthropologist Jason Hickel puts it, that development for some meant underdevelopment for others. It is a zero-sum game, and for centuries the global south has been forced to play the losing hand. Therefore, the left cannot be defined by piecemeal reforms or culture war distractions. It is not social democracy or rainbow-painted capitalism. It is an ideology diametrically opposed to the imperialist status quo. A true left seeks not to manage this decadent civilization, but to end the exploitative arrangement upon which it is built. By the standard of an anti-imperialist politics, the political landscape in the West reveals a damning truth that there is no first world left. What parades as progressive politics is a graveyard of ideas, a political theater where the main strategy is lesser evilism, a manufactured drama between two management styles for the same global empire. As historian Land Self notes, the problem is not the answer, but the question itself. When the choice is between one imperialist politician and another, the defeat comes in accepting the limitation to this choice. The classic case was that the people voted for the lesser evil and got both. The liberal wing of this political class, which includes many progressives and socialists, act as the system's first line of defense. It has perfected the art of co-opting and channeling genuine social movements into a safe electoral route towards the Democratic Party that poses no threat to the establishment, earning it the title, the graveyard of social movements. Its job is not to solve the fundamental contradictions of the system, but to administer decay in a way that is palatable to its citizens, ensuring the flow of wealth from the periphery continues uninterrupted. This patronizing role becomes clearest when genuine revolutions erupt in the global south. As Sartre observed decades ago, the so-called Western left is quick to scold them. You're going too far. We won't support you anymore. So many conditions, so many requests, so many purity tests to the point where he mockingly adds, the natives don't give a damn about their support. For all the good it does them, they might as well stuff it up their backsides. This political bankruptcy is not a recent development, but the logical endpoint of a Western tradition born with a fatal contradiction. The celebrated humanism of the Enlightenment, which produced lofty ideals of freedom, was built during the same period that it perfected the practice of chattel slavery and colonialism. Cesar diagnosed this hypocrisy with surgical precision in his discourse on colonialism. The West's moral framework was rotten from the start, producing a narrow and fragmentary, incomplete and biased, and all in all, sordidly racist concept of human rights. His most chilling conclusion was that European fascism wasn't an aberration. It was simply the violence of colonialism turned inward, applied for the first time to Europeans. He writes that the West tolerated that Nazism before it was inflicted on them, legitimized it because until then, it had only been applied to non-European peoples. This is the rotten foundation of the system we inhabit. In this dynamic, where the people of the global South are reduced to mere pawns, their lives sacrificed for the moral posturing and geopolitical games of Western powers, is not ancient history. Journalist Vincent Bevins records a reflection from an organizer of the 2019 Hong Kong protests, who feared they were being used as a tool. According to the organizer, Hong Kong protesters felt that we were used, that the Trump administration wanted to sacrifice us as part of their propaganda war against China. The goal in that case would not have been for them to win, but to fail, and be repressed very publicly. If they succeeded, it would mean China isn't as bad as they expected, and if they failed, they could use that as political fodder for action. Either way, they did not actually care about the people. And this was not just in the Trump administration, but every administration before that. The primary enforcers of this imperialist world order are the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. Robert Beale explains that while these agents are often criticized by progressives for failing to promote development, it should be understood that their function is not development, but to promote capital accumulation, which continues to entail a transfer of wealth from the South to the North. Their chief weapon is debt, used to impose a form of free market shock therapy known as structural adjustment programs on over 100 countries. As Jason Hickel outlines, they had to cut spending on public services like healthcare and education, and on subsidies for things like farming, food, and infant industries. They also had to privatize public assets by selling off state companies like telecoms and railways. They were forced to radically deregulate their economies. They had to cut trade tariffs, open their markets to foreign competitors, abolish capital controls, abandon price controls, and curb regulations on labor and the environment in order to attract foreign direct investment and to make their economies more efficient. But it is now widely acknowledged by scholars that structural adjustment programs were one of the greatest single causes of poverty in the global South after colonialism. Instead of helping poor countries, as they were supposedly designed to do, SAPs basically destroyed them, reversing all the gains they had made during the developmentalist period. During the 60s and 70s, global South countries enjoyed an average per capita income growth of 3.2%, but during the era of structural adjustment, through the 80s and 90s, income growth rates plunged to 0.7%. As Hickel argues, the problem is not that poor countries are struggling to climb the ladder. The problem is that they are being actively prevented from doing so. The term describing the global South, he suggests, should not be underdeveloped, but a transitive verb, underdeveloped, where one's development is intentionally obstructed by an external power. This is a modern continuation of the colonial project. The historian Walter Rodney argued that the primary achievements of colonialism were stripping Africa of its power to have the ability to defend one's interests and, if necessary, to impose one's will. Today, that power is stripped away not by colonial armies, but by financiers and international institutions. Economist Michael Hudson calls this modern system super-imperialism. He argues that the US dollar's status as the world's reserve currency is the ultimate tool of extraction, allowing America to run massive deficits and enjoy a free lunch at the world's expense. The rest of the world is compelled to finance America's military hegemony and domestic consumption by holding US Treasury bonds, which Hudson describes as a seigniorage tax levied by America on the world's central banks. The IMF acts as the global enforcer for this dollar-centric system. Hudson notes, the IMF's effect was felt not so much as a maker of loans, but as a setter of policy. It was in this sphere that the IMF exerted its control functions over the international financial system. This control reflected US policy at one remove, for the IMF's adopted a deflationary monetarist philosophy of operations with regard to all countries except for the United States. Even programs presented as benevolent, like US aid, are instruments of this imperial policy. Hudson is blunt in his assessment. Not only the incidental effects of US aid, but its stated purpose has been to restrict, rather than enlarge, the capacity for evolution of aid-dependent countries toward greater self-reliance. It is, in his words, a feudatory system that imposes vassalage on developing countries. This theft is codified by international law through institutions like the World Trade Organization, where the United States, the EU, and Japan have enormous market power that allow them to negotiate agreements that skew the rules to their benefit in trade, intellectual property rights, and investment. These intellectual property regimes function as a system of technological feudalism, preventing poorer countries from developing their own industries and medicines and forcing them to pay tribute to Western corporations. This institutionalizes what theorists call unequal exchange. Because wages and resource prices are suppressed in the South, they must export many more units of embodied labor and resources than they import in order to achieve a monetary balance of trade. When an industrialized country trades with an underdeveloped one, it actually exchanges 1 hour of national labor for 5, 10, or 15 hours of labor in the other. As Ha-Joon Chang notes in his work, 23 Things They Don't Tell You About Capitalism, a bus driver in New Delhi gets paid around 18 rupees an hour. His equivalent in Stockholm gets paid around 130 kronas, which was, as of summer 2009, around 870 rupees. In other words, the Swedish driver gets paid nearly 50 times that of his Indian equivalent. Free market economics tells us that if a Swedish driver, let's call him Sven, is paid 50 times more than an Indian driver, let's call him Ram, it must be because Sven is 50 times more productive as a bus driver than Ram is. But is this what is really going on? To begin with, is it possible that someone drives 50 times better than another? Moreover, if anything, Ram would likely be a much more skilled driver than Sven. Sven may of course be a good driver by Swedish standards, but has he ever had to dodge a cow in his life, which Ram has to do regularly? Most of the time, what is required of Sven is the ability to drive straight, while Ram has to negotiate his way almost every minute of his driving through bullock carts, rickshaws, and bicycles stacked 3 meters high with crates. The true scale of this extraction is staggering. Through unequal exchange alone, the Global South lost $2.2 trillion in a single year, an amount Sullivan argues that could have ended extreme poverty 15 times over. Since 1960, the total drain from the South is estimated to be equivalent to $152 trillion today, and the narrative of Western aid is a carefully constructed lie to mask this plunder. As research by Jason Hickel reveals, for every $1 of aid the Global South receives, they lose $24 in net outflows through mechanisms like unrecorded capital flight, trade misinvoicing, and repatriated profits. This is not charity, but, as Hickel terms, aid in reverse. The story of Western aid makes the takers seem like givers, granting them a kind of moral high ground, while preventing those of us who care about global poverty from understanding how the system really works. Colonialism, as Walter Rodney wrote, never had two hands to give and take. It was always a one-armed bandit. This vast parasitic machine is not sustained by economics alone. Its most profound victory is psychological. Fanon described the colonial system as a Manichaean world, a world violently cut in two, where the colonizer and colonized are locked in a zero-sum struggle as this division seeps into the consciousness. Saussure argued that colonization works to decivilize the colonizer, to brutalize him in the true sense of the word, to degrade him, to awaken him to buried instincts, to covetousness, violence, race hatred, and moral relativism. The colonizer, in order to ease his conscience, gets into the habit of seeing the other man as an animal, accustoms himself to treating him like an animal, and tends objectively to transform himself into an animal. The Western citizen learns to see this global order as natural, inevitable, and even righteous. They see the poverty of the global South not as a consequence of their own wealth, but as a failure of those people to develop because of their barbaric nature. Therefore, the historic story we are told, by writers like Howard Zinn, of the Western working class winning its comfortable existence through domestic struggle, is a dangerously incomplete truth. It celebrates the fight over access to the pie, while conveniently ignoring where the ingredients came from. As historian Gerald Horne writes, what is euphemistically referred to as modernity is marked with an indelible stain of what might be termed the three horsemen of the apocalypse: slavery, white supremacy, and capitalism, with the bloody process of human bondage being the driving and animating force of this abject horror. As one scholar put it, the Industrial Revolution in England and the cotton plantation in the South were part of the same set of facts, and as early as 1633, an observer in Suriname noticed that the are the strength and sinews of the Western world. This plunder financed the social peace of the West, its public schools, welfare states, and high wages. It created what Lawson describes as a fatal shift in consciousness. A moment comes when the benefits a worker gains through belonging to a privileged nation takes precedence over the exploitation they suffer through belonging to the proletariat. Walter Rodney calls this what it was, a bribe, where the surplus from Africa was partly used to offer a few more benefits to European workers to make the latter less revolutionary. This transforms the very identity of the Western worker. As J. Sakai argues in Settlers, their class position is inseparable from their role as beneficiaries of a colonial system. The treasured myth of the white proletariat is a pillar of the settler ideological fortress. Their class interest is in imperialism, in their partnership with the bourgeoisie, in dominating the oppressed nations. All classes of Euro-American settlers were equally involved in building a new bourgeois nation on the back of the African colonial proletariat. The answer to why the Western world refuses to abandon its colonial framework is the most uncomfortable truth of all: that for all its flaws, there's no incentive to change a system that is designed to benefit them. Fanon stated it without ambiguity, that this European opulence is literally scandalous, for it has been founded on slavery. It has been nourished with the blood of slaves. The well-being and the progress of Europe have been built up with the sweat and the dead bodies of Arabs, Indians, and the yellow races. This material complicity is why the liberal concept of progress is a dangerous illusion.
Do you feel, however, that we're making progress in this country?
No. I will never say that progress is being made. If you stick a knife in my back 9 inches and pull it out 6 inches, there's no progress. If you pull it all the way out, that's not progress. The progress is healing the wound that the blow made. And they haven't even begun to pull the knife out, much less try and heal the wound. They won't even admit the knife is there.
But today, in an age of unparalleled access to information, even Malcolm's analogy is too generous. It assumes the perpetrator is ignorant, but with the constant, undeniable stream of media showing our imperial crimes, the drone strikes, the sweatshops, the coups, the massacres, the modern Westerner knows the knife is there. They see it, but they have made a conscious decision to leave it in. Not because they are powerless, not because they fail to connect their privilege to another's suffering, but because their comfort depends on it. They ignore it because, for them, the entire brutal system is worth the price of their relative stability. In Ursula Le Guin's story, some citizens, unable to bear the truth, walk away from Omelas. But in our world, there is nowhere to walk away to. The city is global. The task then is not to be the ones who walk away. The task is to be the ones who change Omelas. To tear down the basement and free the child, no matter what it costs the beautiful city above. As Césaire warned, a civilization that proves incapable of solving the problems it creates is a decadent civilization. A civilization that chooses to close its eyes to its most crucial problems is a stricken civilization. A civilization that uses its principles for trickery and deceit is a dying civilization.